Hi, I'm near Forbes Pirie. I've been asked to talk to you about intercultural dialogue in negotiation. And I think I've been asked to do that because I'm a mediator and I facilitated conversations for the G7 on sustainability, for the Church of England on gay marriage, and between MPs, NGOs, and think tanks on the refugee situation, helping them to understand each other, helping them to understand across different disciplines and across different cultures. And I've been fascinated about negotiation and culture, probably since I was closer to your age, and now I'm quite far away from your age. So building bridges across cultures and divides and different opinions changes the world. Just helping people to understand each other better and being one of those people who understands other people better helps to change the world. So I thought I would just begin by just talking a little bit about what culture is. And we often think of culture in quite a superficial way. A country maybe has a culture, but culture is everywhere and everything. Culture is the air that we breathe. We don't really see it, we don't really notice it, but it's a lens that we see through. For fish, culture would be the water that they swim in. And culture isn't just at a country or a national level, although of course it is. Every football club has a culture, every room has a culture. And culture is made up of norms and values which are beneath the surface, what is expected. And deeper down, things that are known unknowns or unknown unknowns even. And the unknown unknowns are things that are so obvious to you that you assume that they're the same for everyone else, but they're not. So culture is basically the lens through which people see the world and through which they operate. It's a perspective, and it can be very deeply ingrained in people and very closely tied to their identity. Good negotiators or great negotiators require two things: a lot of confidence and a lot of humility. And humility is not to be underestimated, because to be a great negotiator, you have to realize that you don't understand every other culture and you don't know everything. So I'm going to give you my 10 top tips on negotiation in a minute. But first of all, I just want to tell you something. Negotiation can seem like a scary word. And the Harvard School of Negotiation defines negotiation in the book Getting to Yes, which is a very well-known book, as back and forth communication designed to reach an agreement when you and the other side have some interests that are shared and others that are opposed. So that may sound kind of highbrow and convoluted, but negotiation is a conversation. It's a conversation to try and solve a problem. So negotiation is about people, always about people, because we have these lenses that we see the world through, and about solving problems. And it's something that you do every single day. You do it when you were joining this program, there was a negotiation. You probably applied to someone and had your application accepted. That was a negotiation. You're giving your time to be part of this program. You had other options, but this is what you chose to do. You negotiate when you go to the shops, you negotiate with your friends, with your parents. Every single day you negotiate, and it is a skill that can be learned. So my 10 top tips on negotiation. I've said that negotiation is about solving problems. So my first tip is look beneath positions to needs. What do I mean by that? People often take a stand. They say, I want this. And you might say, I want this. And then it's stuck. I want this is a position. You have to explore a little deeper to understand what are the interests of that person. Why do they want this? What are they trying to achieve? And then you explore further and you find out, what do they really need? And very often there's more of an overlap between needs than there is between the original positions. So an example that's given in some of the classic books is about two sisters who are fighting over an orange. And each one says, I want the orange. And the classic fair thing to do might be to cut the orange in half. But when you look at why do they want the orange? What's this about? You start asking questions. One says, well, I want to eat the orange. And the other says, well, I want the peel so that I can bake a cake. So you could use the peel and then eat the orange, and everyone can have what they really need, what they're looking for. They can have their interests satisfied. So always look beneath the surface. That's tip number one. Tip number two is be aware that your perspective might be different from the perspective of the other person. So the lens that you're looking at things through might be different. And this may be cultural, but it may not just be cultural. And in Getting to Yes, which is the classic negotiation book from the Harvard School of Negotiation, they give a fantastic example of a landlady and a tenant who have completely different views on exactly the same facts. She thinks the rent is too low, he thinks it's too high. And it goes on. And the last two are my favorites. He thinks he's a great tenant because as soon as she asks him for the rent, he pays. She thinks he's a terrible tenant because he never pays the rent on time and she always has to ask him for the rent. He thinks that the landlady is cold and distant and totally unfriendly. And she thinks that she's always a great landlady because she's so respectful of a tenant's privacy. Same facts, completely different perspectives. So this can be at a cultural level, but it can also just be at a simple, what is your role in this discussion perspective. My third tip is intimately tied to perspective. It is that you are often wrong. And part of the reason you're wrong is because you see things through your lens and you can't see things always through the other person's lens because you don't always know what that lens is. Thinking that you're right gets in the way of you taking in information. So if you think you already know, if you think you've already understood, it's harder for you to learn, to listen, to take in new information. Which brings me to point number 4, which is listen. Listening is your most vital tool, and listening requires that humility that you know that you might be wrong and you might have something to learn. And there are 3 things that listening gives you. Number 1, you get more information when you listen. When you have more information, you can make better decisions that are grounded in reality in the real world, not in some fantasy or the idea that you have. So you have to be prepared to adjust. The second benefit of listening is that someone might actually listen to you if you listen to them. We are often trying to get our point across and sometimes sort of pushing our point forcefully. But if we listen to other people, they are far more likely to be willing to listen to us. The third reason to listen is that listening creates connection. We all want to feel listened to. We all want to feel heard as human beings. We all have this deep desire to be understood. So listening gives you better information, means you might be listened to, and also means that you might create a better connection with the other person. And that brings me on to my 5th tip, which is show that you've listened and show that you've understood. I've just said that people want to feel understood. It's really important to them. So if you can show them that you've listened and show them that you've understood, you're going to create a better connection and a better learning environment. How do you do this? How do you show people that you've listened and understood? Well, FBI hostage negotiators therapists, mediators, we all do the same thing. We repeat back what we've heard, and diplomats do this too. So even just repeating back the last thing that someone has said will help create a connection, but you can repeat all of what someone said or what you've understood, and then check in to make sure that you have understood correctly. So again, that willingness to be wrong. And sometimes when you do this, you're going to struggle to do it, because you're going to think, oh, I don't agree with them, so why am I repeating back what they're saying? Well, agreeing and understanding are different. And so you can show someone you've listened, connect with them, make them feel really good, and open them up to listening to you by just telling them what you've understood their view to be. It doesn't mean that you agree with it. So for example, if this is what you've heard someone say, you can say, okay, so what I'm understanding is that from your perspective, the world is flat and everybody in the world wears pink hats. Is that right? And they'll say yes, or they'll correct you. And they'll feel really understood, maybe for the first time ever, because everyone has been disagreeing with them so vehemently that no one has bothered to show them that they understand their position. Once you've understood their position, and they might clarify it, and then they are much more likely to listen to you. So show them that you've listened and understood. Point number 6 is be willing to walk away. It's about mindset. So in a relationship, it's quite unattractive to be needy and desperate. And the same goes in negotiation. And it's not only unattractive, it's quite disrespectful, because you're not allowing the other person the space to do what they want, to make their own choice. And sort of oddly, being more respectful, being willing to let them do what they want and not being desperate to come to an agreement with them often makes people want to agree with you more. So your attitude needs to be, I'd like to work with you. I'd like to do this deal, but, if it doesn't work out, that's fine. And I have other options. So you don't necessarily have to say that, but you have to be willing to walk away. And so my point number 7 is know what you're walking away to. And in the negotiation books, this is called BATNA, your best alternative to negotiated agreement. So do some research, find out if you can't agree with this person, if you can't go forward with that, what is your best other alternative? So for example, in joining this program, if you couldn't have joined this program, what would be the next best thing that you could do? Would you have found an internship somewhere? Would you have done a placement? Would you have worked and made money? Or what is your best alternative to negotiated agreement? Know what your options are. And that will help you decide whether to accept what's being offered by the other party or not, because you know what your alternative is. Point 8 is look at what's going on behind the conversation. So there's some great books on this, and Difficult Conversations, also produced through the Harvard School of Negotiation, has some great information on this. But there's a lot of things going on behind the conversation. The conversation is what's on the surface. Underneath the surface, there are feelings. And sometimes we want to, push feelings aside. You can't push feelings aside. You can act appropriately about feelings, but feelings are important. There's people's identity, and even in a workplace situation, people's reputation, people's feeling of being competent and doing a good job, people's sense of belonging. And that's so important to all of us, to feel like we belong. And particularly in intercultural dialogue, this identity, this belonging, means that we all want to be respected. So lots of things going on underneath the surface, these different perspectives about what happened, about feelings, about identity. and often some kind of attempting to blame going on. And blame is backwards looking and shaming. So what you want to be doing if you want to be moving forwards is looking to the future and looking at, oh, what did I do wrong? What did you do wrong? What could we do better? And how can we create a better future together? And that leads me on to my 9th tip on negotiation, which is focus on the other person's world. We've talked about perspectives, we've talked about culture. If you want to convince someone to do something, it has to be in their interest to do it. And their interest is not where we naturally focus. We're naturally a little bit selfish, a little bit self-interested, and we're focusing on what do I want? But you need to focus on what they want and find a way of making what you want good for them. So this is where we're looking for a win-win. And particularly if you want a long-term relationship with this person, country, company, you want to make sure that what is decided is in both of your interests. And in order to do that, you have to look at what is the other person's world and what are their interests and how can you satisfy them. And sometimes you can satisfy them much more cheaply than you think you can. So look for things that it's easy for you to give to the other person, that are easy wins. So for example, if you were a theatre company and you didn't have quite enough money to hire an actor that you wanted to hire, well, maybe what's important to that actor is having their names in big lights on the front of the theatre and having their name plastered all over the program. That's something that's cheap for you, and they may be willing to trade something for that. So always look at what is going on in the other person's world and how can you help meet their needs and satisfy their interests. So those are my 9 tips. I hope they've been helpful. They come from a variety of sources, a lot from the Harvard School of Negotiation. They have some great books and great resources. I like to go beyond those. FBI hostage negotiators, salespeople actually negotiate. So what I want to leave you with is that people and relationships are so important in negotiating, and that you're trying to solve a problem with other people and you want to solve it with their best interests in mind. Be confident, be humble, know that there are a lot of things that you don't know, and be curious about the other person, about the other people, what's going on with them, what do they want. Repeat back so that you can bridge divides, make friends, show that you've understood. If people like you, they're more likely to want to give you things and help you out. And that's going to create a learning environment that you can work well with other people in. I'm Mia Forbes Pirie. I'm very honored to be sharing some tips with you, and I hope that your program goes incredibly well. And I have full confidence that you will go out into the world, each one of you, and do phenomenal things with your future. I hope I've inspired you to learn more about negotiation, because there's so much to learn, and it's just such a fun thing that we do all the time. Thank you.